Good afternoon, my name's Fiona. Today we're going to be making some coasters with some resin and some Couture Creations papers. So today I'm going to use still going to use some of the, what do they call it? The Elegance collection. That's this one. So I'm just going to cut these up into 4x4 squares. Just move them out the way. That's one. So these are 4 inches by 4 inches. 2, and this one will be 3 because I'm using 12 by 12s. And I'll cut one more out of this one here. Another 4 inches. Yep. Okay, so we've got 4. We've got enough for 5 coasters, but we're going to do 4. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do one. And I've got some that I've prepared for you for, and I'll talk you through that as well. So I brought these craft boards. I'm going to say I brought these from Choice in Kingaroy, which is close to where I live, which is just a cheap shop. So I've got these square ones, and I've also got, where did I put those? Some round ones. So I could actually do these round ones as well, but I'm going to do the square ones just for convenience today. I'll do the round ones for another thing. So we're going to go through what I need to do for one of these coasters, and then we'll go through the rest of what's got to go on. Okay, so this is just a bit of greaseproof paper that I was using yesterday. I'll flip it over that way so it doesn't come undone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab, this is just a sweets lid. I've got a paintbrush, and I'm going to get my tacky glue. It's turbo tacky, I don't want turbo tacky. So I've just got some tacky glue here. And what we're going to do is we're going to seal the coaster and one of these bits of paper. So I'm going to put some tacky glue on here. You could use PVA if you've got PVA at home. You're more than welcome to use that. I have used PVA before, so I'm just going to leave that little bit on there for the moment. I'm going to grab, this is just a Couture Creations ink spray bottle, I think they are. Has a bit of water to it, just to thin it down a little. Mix it together. And we're just going to make sure that we cover the whole of the coaster right to the corners, and we want to make sure we get the edges as well. So I'll just go around and paint all those edges, spin it around again. I'll just give that another little bit. So I want this all running the one way to start off with for the first coat. So I'll have it all running that way. And then when we do our second coat, we'll go the other way. So it's the same with this. I'm going to coat this rather well. And you want to make sure you get a relatively even coat. If you don't want to use a paintbrush, you can also use one of those paint sponges. You know, that's what I used for the very first ones that I did, and I just couldn't remember where I put it, so I haven't done it again, but it's okay. So that's the first layer on both sides. Let's push that to the side for a moment. Now I'm just going to dry these quickly off, and then we'll do another coat on this side, dry it off, and then flip them over and do the other side. Okay, so that's the first side done, and we're just going to give that another light coat. I might just add a little bit more tacky glue. This bottle hasn't got too much left in it. This is the last of my tacky glue. I need to order some more. Okay. I'll just add a little bit more water to that mix. Oh yeah, you can see that. Just checking to make sure you can see what I'm doing. So just adding a little bit more water to the tacky glue, giving it a good smoosh. Okay, so now we'll do, so this time I'm going to turn it, so it was this way, I'm going to turn it this way, and then we're going to do a cross again. So we've got the glue going in two directions, and hopefully by doing it that way we don't miss any spots, because I do want to make sure that this is really well covered on both sides. So the reason that we have to seal our paper first is because our resin is a liquid. It will definitely get into the paper because it's porous, and it won't look so great. You'll get like wet marks all through your paper, and it'll start to swell and do all sorts of silly things. But yeah, so that's why we're sealing it. And it's the same with our coaster. And I've just flipped this around the other way so that we've got some going both ways. And I really need to make sure that the sides of the coaster are done as well, because as we all know, when we have a drink and we've got it sitting on there, it can sometimes be a little bit wet on a table or something, depending on where we are. So we don't want any of that liquid getting into our coaster at all. There's another light going over, making sure I get those corners really well. That seems to be the place where we most forget to get. Okay, and once again I'm just going to dry these two off. The reason that I'm using greaseproof paper is because it won't stick to it. I mean, it can stick to it, but it doesn't stay stuck to it. So I'm just going to start on our second side of our coaster. Give it a good mix. Make sure we're still doing our edges each time we're putting a coat on. Because if anything, that'll probably be where the moisture would get into them and make them swell. It's got a bit of hair on it. Let's pull that off. Okay, that's the first side. Let's flip this around now. That's okay. So now I'm going to do the same to this piece. Making sure we get the whole piece, making sure we get right in those corners again. Okay, so dry these two pieces off. Okay, one more coat on this side for each of them and dry them again, and then we're ready to start putting them all together. So this is what you're going to do for each piece of each timber coaster, and for each piece of paper that you're going to adhere to your coaster as well. I'm just going to pull that up a bit so that it doesn't stick too much. I'm going to flip this around, and we're going to come back across here, using up as much of our glue as we've got there on this one. I do like to make sure that these are really well coated and sealed. Okay, dry that should do. Okay, so this is our first coaster. I'm just going to take these off. Now a bit of paper that we've got here. Might just put that back over on itself because it's got all the glue on it. Let's pop this back on here for the time being. So now we're going to use some Couture Creations Quick Dry Adhesive. Now, I do want to put a reasonable amount of this on, but what I don't want to do is I don't really want to have it oozing out the side if I can avoid it. Because we will also be using a brayer to make sure that our paper goes down nice and flat. So what I like to do with the glue is I like to make sure that it's a little bit, probably 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the corners of the coaster. Make sure you've got a sort of good amount, and then just give it a bit of a swirl through the centre. And this is just so that our coasters are adhered really well onto it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my coaster, my piece of paper to go on my coaster, and then I'm just going to get my brayer. Oops. Just be careful in case it does shift. It will be a little bit vulnerable for a few seconds. This is a quick dry adhesive, so it won't take long. So you do have a couple of seconds to play with it. I should be right now and it shouldn't move. And I'm just making sure that I get right over to those edges, right up onto those corners, make sure they're really well adhered. Smooshing that glue right down into the paper and the coaster. And so this will also help us to get a really nice flat coaster with no bubbles. Okay, so I'm just going to grab the dryer and just dry that a little bit. I've just got a little bit that's come out on the sides, which is fine. And if you can see how the edge of our, it's just coming over the edge of our coaster here. What I'm going to do is we're going to trim that off, but I do want the glue to be properly dry before I do that. So I'll just hit it with the, should be right by about now. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a craft knife. I'm going to place my knife right up against the edge and push down firmly and just take off any of that edge that's there. That glue wasn't quite dry, but that'll be fine. I'm just going to do the same on this one. Just make sure we take off that edge. Round onto this one. And each side will be a little different, I would say. Okay, that's better. It's got all of that one. Now this last side to go. Okay. And that's about it. That's about all we need to do for our coasters. The next thing we would do is we would make up our resin. Now I'm not going to make up the resin. Let me see, what am I going to do? Yes, I will. I will resin this one. Give me 2 seconds. Actually, I might stop the video here. I'm going to prep the other 4 coasters. Actually, no, I'm going to use the ones I made yesterday that I made a few mistakes on. So these ones were ones that I did yesterday that there was a few mistakes made on. So one of the things we're going to have to do now before I put the resin on is we're going to have to mask up the base. The reason we mask up this base area is so that if there's any resin that falls off, that if it goes underneath onto the back of the coaster, we can just take the masking tape off and it'll come off. It's not going to ruin the underside of our coaster. So I'll leave that one done and I'll just mask up these other ones and show you how I did that. I'm sure you're quite able to understand what I've done. So, oops, put that in the bin. So just grabbing some masking tape, lining it up with the edge of our coaster. These were some of my experimental ones that didn't turn out quite as I planned them in my own head. But that's okay. I don't mind if it goes a little bit over the coaster because like we did with the, when we done the glue, we can trim that off. So I'm just going to trim off these edge pieces. And I will also trim along this edge because this one I do know has gone a little bit over the edge because we don't want to create a lip there for our resin. We want it to be able to flow straight over the sides if that's, yep, no, that's good. And we'll just do that all the way around to the 4 of our coasters. Okay, same thing again. Trim. Just a little bit on that one. Okay, that's 1, 2, 2 more to go. Just do all 4 sides and cut it all off at once. Okay, just going to slice off along there. Make sure I'm sitting right flush with the side of the coaster. Once again, sitting right flush close with the coaster. Okay, that's another one done. The hardest part is actually getting all the sticky tape off, the masking tape off my fingers. It doesn't want to go today. Okay, that's 3 done. Now for our 4th one. And I am burnishing these edges down as I go as well, because we don't want any of the resin getting underneath it. We do really want them to just flow over the side and hopefully not underneath. Though by doing this, it saves us a lot of work, because if the resin actually goes underneath, then that means that you're going to have to get out there before you can actually put your cork base on. You're going to have to get out there and sand all of that resin back. In cold weather, you'll find your resin will take longer to cure. The type of resin I'm using is Couture Creations epoxy resin, which is actually a 1:1 ratio. It dries beautifully clear. Drawbacks of art resin is that it cures hard, but it doesn't cure as hard as, say, a resin that is possibly 2:1. 2:1. I don't know the science behind it, but I just know that that is the case. But that's not to say that it's not any good. It's actually good for these types of projects and making jewellery and things like that. It's a little more flexible at the end of it than what other resins are. So I suppose that's the biggest difference that I can come up with. Give me 2 seconds and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back again. What I have done is I have taken a piece of cardboard, which is underneath here, and I've actually placed some baking paper over the top of it, or greaseproof paper, I think you call it in the States, and things like that. And I've got these little ramekins that I don't really use. I got them, I think I bought some mini cheesecakes one time, and that's what they came in. They're actually really good ramekins. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just that I've taken them over and used them in my art room. So this set of cases will be for my house because they're not 100% perfect. They didn't quite do what I wanted them to do, but that's okay. Just make sure that one's scooped off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make up our resin. So today's resin, let's move them over there. So I've used a calculator from that's online from what is it? think it's called Art Resin. I think it's an American brand. And just checking my, yep. So this is the resin that we're going to use. We're using clear casting resin, and this is a Couture Creations one. It's actually very reasonably priced. It goes a long way. I've actually resined over some of my artworks with it, and it's been fabulous. Haven't had any problems whatsoever. Just checking the bottom of my cup. I didn't clean that out very well yesterday. Just have to give that a bit of a wipe out before I start. It's got a little bit more in there that needs to go. That's it. Okay, so part A is our resin. Part B is our hardener. Our instructions say, using the graduated pouring containers, measure out the equal parts, part A and part B. After the liquids have been poured together, mix thoroughly, keep the stirring implement in contact with the bottom of the graduated mixing container for approximately 3 to 5 minutes. Make sure to scrape down the sides and the bottom of the graduated mixing container until no colour variation is seen. Then mix for an additional 2 minutes. Now your casting resin is ready to use. So it recommends that you pour your desired amount of resin into 2 of these. So for us today, I need about 60 mils. Yeah, approximately 60 mils of resin. Sorry, I'm just seeing that looked a little bit lifted. It's not. It's just the way it was sitting in the light. So because I need if I needed 100 mils of resin, I would just use this cup and go 50 and 50 and be done with it. But I can't figure out the measurements on this jug properly. You would think that this would be... Anyway, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to tip 30 mils of hardener into one and 30 mils of resin into the other. So I'm going to start with my hardener actually, because I like to tip my hardener into my container first. So, and I want 30 mils. So I'm going to take that nearly to the top, where our 30 mil mark is. Beautiful. So there's our 30 mils. I'll tip that in there. Now I always like to put my hardener in first because it makes for an easier cleanup. I'll sit that one on there, and now I'm going to add my resin. So this is my clear casting resin. I'm just going to add 30 mils into the container and drop it into our So you'll notice that your casting resin is a little bit thicker than your hardener. Just making sure I get that right the way. Yep, that's it, beautiful. So now I'm going to tip that into here as well. Now I'll just put them both aside because they'll need to be washed now. Swap that off the side there. Okay, so I've got a piece of clear perspex. Let's put our lid back on first so we don't get spilt anywhere. I'll move them out of the way. So I use this piece of clear perspex. It's great in this container, and I just literally keep it on the bottom and just mix our resin. I'm not too concerned about bubbles. You need to, when you're mixing resin, you don't want to stir it too much, in terms of you don't want to create bubbles. So the best method I've come up with is, and this was taught to me by at a resin workshop that I went to called From Natural Edge Timber here in Queensland. So you put it onto the side, pull back, and just keep doing this type of motion. It doesn't create as many bubbles. I've never had too many bubbles in mine, which has been really, maybe I've just been lucky, I don't know. But I can see that in this one there's quite a few bubbles. So yesterday when I pulled my resin out, because it has been sitting for a while and because our weather has been really cold here this last month or more, my resin had solidified in the bottle. If you find that happening, don't throw your resin away. There's nothing wrong with your resin, it's just cold. Resin doesn't like really cold temperatures. So what I did is I got a bucket with some just hot tap water in it, and I set my bottle of resin, which is part A, in the water, and I let it sit there for about 10 or 15 minutes. I still found that that wasn't enough, and I needed to have something that was going to melt the resin back down to where it needed to be. So I had a read online and I found out that you can actually microwave your resin. So with the instructions that I got from that, what I did is I just undid my lid a little bit on the resin, and I put it in the microwave for 10 seconds. Took it out. Because if the microwave, it heats from the inside out, it does make it a little quicker to get your resin thawed out again and usable. The thing is, you've got to make sure that, because it's crystallized, that you make sure you get rid of all the crystallization. Otherwise it'll happen again. So I did that for 30 seconds and that brought my resin back, and I just let it sit. It still had one piece in the center of it, and I just let that be, basically. So this resin probably needs to be stirred for about 4 or 5 minutes all up. Mine is just about there. So a couple of other things to note with resin. Apparently you can use your heat gun to get rid of the bubbles. You can use a torch, which is what I like to use. But you can also use methylated spirits or isopropyl alcohol. I have used the isopropyl alcohol to remove bubbles and things out of my creations before. Works quite effectively if you have it. Not everybody has those types of things at home, so I've got this little hot devil torch, which will be what I'm going to use today. I can still see my resin's still a bit cloudy, so I've got to keep mixing until it's crystal clear. Get like little strings in your resin. That's what they look like. It's not strings in it, but that's what it looks like. So you get these little strings, and that's what you're trying to get rid of. And that once it goes clear, that means to say you've got it all working very well. Okay, we are almost there. And the other thing to think about too with resin, if you're going to use resin, all different resins have different instructions, because all resins are not the same. I can still see little strings in there. This is probably the hardest part of it all, actually, is this part. We are almost there. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel now. So I'm just going to take a mouthful of my cup of tea. Over there, out of the way. Okay, So our resin is ready to rock and roll. Okay, so I'm just going to grab this cloth, wipe off my stirring stick, and I'm just going to grab my spray bottle of isopropyl. So for me, I like to spritz a little bit of isopropyl in the top. That'll just help those bubbles to disappear, and I like to do this into my containers that we've used as well, and onto my cloth to wipe off my implements so that we can reuse these things again. That is the basic reason for that. Okay, so now I'm just going to pop this out of the way. I'm going to move this over so that you can see what I'm doing. Now, I'm going to start with this back one first. So I worked it out. It works out to be roughly about 16 mils of resin per coaster. Just putting that one on there. Let's go around and put a decent amount on all of them. Another thing about resin is it's all self-leveling. All these resins are anyway, so just as long as they're on a flat surface and it's level, these will actually level themselves. Okay, and our last one. And you can already see that these are already starting to move. I'm going to move this one back a bit that way. Okay, just pop that out of our way for a moment. So now I'm just going to grab some tools. I'm just going to grab some of these are just some silicone makeup brushes, I think they are. I never brought them for makeup, but I'm wanting to make sure that each one of my corners is really well covered in resin. So I'm just bringing all this resin right up to the edges, making sure they're all getting covered. Now you've got a little bit of working time with this resin. It doesn't give me a working time with, doesn't say on the box what the working time with it is. I haven't seen it on there when I've had a look, because I haven't deliberately gone and looked for it, but I'd say you've probably got at least 20 minutes at least. In colder weather, probably longer. It's still quite cool here today, so I've probably got at least half an hour to 3/4 of an hour working time with the resin. So that'll give me time to make sure that all this resin comes all the way to the edge on each one of these. I probably should have done this one first. Okay, making sure it goes all the way to those edges, right onto that, to those corners, along the edge. Bring it all the way up to this edge. So these silicone makeup brush things, they're not bad for this actually, and they're easy clean, so I can reuse them. I don't have to go out and buy a heap of things that I've got to reuse and replenish each time. So I like the idea of using these. As you can see, I'm just double checking, making sure I've got right up to those edges. Yep, that one looks good. Now I'll do this one. Right up to the edge. So we're just encouraging our resin to go where we want it to. Not pushing it around too much. Just encouraging it to come right up to those edges, right up to the side. Doesn't matter if a little bit goes over the edge, that's fine. We've got our tape in place underneath so that if anything goes over the edge, it's not going to wreck our piece. In this colder weather, it could take a little bit longer than 1 or 2 hours to have these dry enough to take the tape off the bottom. They recommend that you take it off within that 2-hour range, but with the ones I did yesterday, it was more like about 6 hours before mine was dry enough to actually take the tape off. And because mine didn't drip over the edge too much, it was quite, I didn't really have to take it off straight away either, so that's the other thing to look out for. So this one might go over a little bit. I see that one hasn't gone up the edge. So now I just want to go back around and have a really good look at them and make sure they're sitting right flush up to the edge of each of my coasters, and that's not sitting flush on that one there. Just make sure that gets covered. It's better. Sometimes you have to get down a little lower and have a look across them. But no, they're looking pretty good. So I'm going to leave that there now. So I'm going to grab my little tool and I'm just going to run this across the top of my resin, and that will pop any of the bubbles that may be in there. Don't leave your flame on there too long. I can see that this one's got a couple of spots now. Okay, put that back there. Go back to doing these two. So run that across the edge. And this one. I can see that this one's dripping a little bit, which is perfectly fine. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my isopropyl. This is just to be a little bit of extra, give it a spritz over the top of each one, and that should make sure that our, okay, I'm back again now, and I've got with me some finished coasters that I did yesterday. So these ones were done with the Australian Natural Beauties. I've got some gold embossing powder around the edges of these, which has turned out quite nice. This was a koala that I cut out of one of the pieces of paper, which I thought was really cute. You've got a platypus, Tassie Devil and an echidna with these. They're a bit sticky at the moment. I don't know what I've put on them, but anyway, I'll have to wipe them over. So I'm really happy with these. As you can see, I've adhered the cork to the bottom. And so to do that, all I did was I cut off our pieces of cork like that. These are a 4x4. I used some of the quick dry adhesive, the same as what we used on the paper when we adhered it to the top of our coaster, so on here. And so after my coasters had been resined and they're dry, I take this off. I add some of the Couture Creations quick dry adhesive. I line my cork up, add it, get my brayer it, make sure that it's nicely adhered, making sure that I get the corners, and then our coaster is finished basically. And so as you can see, that's what I've done here. So this coaster has had its layer of resin. I took the paper off and I've actually adhered some cork. So some of the cork was a little bit too long. For those bits that were a little bit too long, I just took my craft knife, placed it down and just took it right across the edge and took off any excess that I had. And that is your coasters made. Thanks very much. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.